and welcome to the 2022 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. My name is Francesca Flores. I'm the author of Diamond City and Shadow City and the upcoming book, The Witch and the Vampire. Please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box before we get started, and don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. If you're a school, classroom, librarian, or educator joining us, please enter our classroom book set giveaway, and you can find the link to the entry form for that in our chat. So first up, I'm going to go through our lovely panelists and introduce each one, and I'll ask them to tell us a little bit about their books. So I'm just going to go in order of my screen. So we have Linda Raquel Nieves Perez, is an Afro-Boricua writer born on a rainy night in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, which they often blame for their obsession for writing about water goddesses with stormy tempers. Hello, Linda.
Hi, everyone. I think, the debut baby in this group. My story came out in the Reclaim the Stars anthology back in February, and my story is about this teen non-binary that is coming back to Puerto Rico. Their name is Gabe, and they have to confront a family curse while also trying to understand the drama in their family. So it's a story about acceptance and just learning to understand and love yourself.
Thank you. I love everything about that, and I love your crown. It's perfect.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Liz Huerta, is a widely admired Mexican short story writer and essayist, published in Lightspeed, The Cut, The Portland Review, The Rumpus, Miami Rail, and more. Her short story, The Wall, is included in the anthology A People's Future of the United States. Huerta has also been a 2018 Breadloaf Fellow, a 5-time Vona Fellow, and the winner of the Lumina Fiction Contest, selected by Roxane Gay, who called her writing a menacing, inescapable seduction.
Hi, everyone. I'm the author of The Lost Dreamer, which came out March 1st of this year. It is a Mesoamerican informed fantasy novel, the story of two young women who were born with the same gift, the ability to enter a different dimension when they sleep at night. One of them is born to a tradition. One of them is born in the wild without any training. There's a prophecy in the world about someone called the Lost Dreamer who will either save or destroy the world, and we're figuring out which one of these two young women it is.
I love everything about that. It sounds so magical. All right. Next up, we have Gabe Cole Novoa, is a Latinx transmasculine author who writes middle grade and YA fiction featuring marginalized characters grappling with identity. He has an MFA in writing for children, lives with a chronic illness, and is a popular blogger and YouTuber.
I'm Gabe Cole Novoa. My book, The Wicked Bargain, is a YA Latina fantasy about a transmasculine non-binary pirate on a mission of revenge, redemption, and revolution in the aftermath of a deal with the devil gone wrong.
Yes, I love that. Pirates. Okay. And next up, last but not least, we have Aiden Thomas. Aiden Thomas is a trans Latinx New York Times bestselling author with an MFA in creative writing from Mills College. Originally from Oakland, California, they now make their home in Portland, Oregon. Aiden is notorious for not being able to guess the endings of books and movies and organizes their bookshelves by color.
Hello, I'm Aiden Thomas. My newest book is called The Sunbearer Trials, which came out on September 6th. I pitched it as Mexican Percy Jackson meets the Hunger Games. It is about how every 10 years in this world, in order to keep the apocalypse from happening, they have to refuel the sun. And in order to do that, there is the Sunbearer Trials, where 10 demigods compete to win the title of Sunbearer, who brings light and life back to the cities for another 10 years. But in order to do that, they must sacrifice the person who comes in last place. And my main character, Teo, is a lesser demigod, not from a very fancy godly parent, who is suddenly sucked into these trials and has to figure out how to survive them.
Sounds so good. I can't wait. Okay, thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. I will next up start asking our questions and just getting right into it. So the first question is, where do you first draw inspiration from when starting a story? Is it the world, the characters, a magic system, or something else? And let's start with Linda. We're just going to go in the same order that we did.
Okay. I don't think I've ever gotten inspiration like the same way for my different stories. For example, my story that was published in Reclaim the Stars had inspiration from two sources. One, I love the beach. I live like 5 minutes from the beach here in Puerto Rico. So I am constantly going there just to hear the waves and kind of like calm myself. So I have a really close relationship with anything that has to do with the beach and anything like that. So I wanted to write something that felt familiar to me in that way, but I also wanted to explore themes of identity. And I was just scrolling one day through Pinterest because why not? And I saw a photo that was kind of like a photoshopped vision of an underwater cave. And that just sparked my imagination. And I was studying like Taino myths at that time. So I was reading about Woven sets and everything just came together. So that's how I got inspiration for that story. But mostly I get inspiration from different things. I started one story because I wanted to write about like a phrase we use in Puerto Rico that is, I don't know how to translate that, but we say, cuando está lloviendo es que la bruja se está casando. So I wanted to write something about that. And I started story just because of that. So it really depends on what I want to write at the moment and just wanted to explore.
Thank you. I love hearing about all of your inspiration. Next up, we have Liz.
I think, like Linda, excuse me, my inspiration can come from the most random of places. I think our minds are amazing. For The Lost Dreamer specifically, it's a story of these women who go to the same world every night when they dream, and I have that ability too. I've been going to the same place every night when I dream since I was young, and one of my sisters has the same ability, and one of my aunts. It's this really interesting experience. But within that, I think that when you go back and you read your work, you are like, oh, all these parts of the world that I wasn't even considering when I was writing are there in the subconscious while you're creating and coming up. I go through my work and I see references to The Secret Garden, to Clan of the Cave Bear, to shows like Sense8. There's all these inspirations that are kind of just floating in the brain that show up in the writing. So I think the inspiration can come from absolutely anywhere. And when I'm stuck with writing, I'll listen to music that I really like and then try to write the backstory of a song. Be like, what could have inspired this song? And I have some really interesting short fiction based on songs. So it's a good little writing trick if you're stuck.
That's a really cool idea. I might try that sometime. Okay, next up we have Gabe.
Yeah, so this really depends on the story for me. With The Wicked Bargain, it was the premise that came first. Originally, I just really wanted to write about gay Latina pirates. And around the same time, I was learning more about Mexican and Cuban mythology, and it came across a couple Deal with the Devil stories that I thought were really interesting. And then it occurred to me that pirates and deals with the devil are two themes that would go together super well, and I all evolved from there.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. And next up we have Aiden.
I feel like whenever I hear people giving writing advice about how to start a story, they're like, come up with the plot first and then come up with the characters. So I constantly enjoy making my life difficult. And I always come up with the characters first. And then I'm like, well, now we have to figure out a plot. And that's really tricky. So usually, yeah, I come up with the character that I really want to write about. And it's the most random stuff. It's like a line of text. I can't tell you, when I was drafting The Sun Bearer, there's this one joke that I wanted to make and I couldn't figure out where to put it. And so I spent hours just like trying to build a plot around this one specific joke that I wanted to make. So my inspiration is like very random. It's usually some kind of character or character trait, but I also enjoy just like making things difficult for myself and coming up with random ideas and trying to figure out how to shove them into a plot. And what Liz said about the songs is also very accurate for me. There's a chapter and a half in Cemetery Boys, which is my debut novel, that is literally East Side by Benny Blanco, Halsey, and Khalid. Like verbatim. It's because I heard that song and I was like, wait, I was like, I can do this. So yeah, songs are also a really big one. That's really funny. As soon as Liz said that, I was just like, big brain moment. Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's so relatable. I always come up with like a concept and characters and stuff, and I'll send it to my agent or my friends, and they're like, "Hey, Francesca, what's the plot?" I'm like, "I don't know."
You're like, listen, that's not important right
Yeah,
now.
we'll figure that out later. They're gonna do some stuff. They're not gonna like it. That's the plot. Okay. The next question that I have is there are many ways that someone could feel like they don't fit into certain spaces, especially when you're a marginalized ethnicity or culture, or if you're queer, like a lot of us here are. Writing fantasy can give us new avenues to explore what it means to belong, when magic and the way it influences society can add another depth to our characters' identities. Do your characters ever struggle with that sense of belonging and fitting in? And how do you find ways to describe that feeling, that struggle, by using fantasy? Okay, start with Linda.
Again. I think every single main character that I've written has this feeling of not belonging. Like, again, I'm talking about Reclaim the Stars because it's the only word that you can read right now. But the first line in that story is when Abuela told me she loved me, we all knew she was lying. So it's always something that I like exploring through fantasy, because a lot of us feel like we don't belong in the real world, and we try to look for reasons for that, and sometimes we find them, sometimes we don't. And I feel like trying to reach like a conclusion through fantasy is such an interesting way, because sometimes we cannot see things that are happening to us in real life in front of us. But once we try to explore that thing through fantasy, we're like, oh, this makes sense. Like, I actually know what is happening. I actually know what I can do. So I really like giving my characters that chance to like explore what is happening in their lives. I mostly write magical realism, so that's like their escape most of the time. So yeah, I like using fantasy to explore their identities, explore who they are, explore who they can be, and hopefully make people who read the story also realize what they can be or what they can do.
I agree. It's such a fantasy is such a great medium to like explore that. Okay, next up we have Liz.
I think that if you're going to get heavy, you should have fun at the same time, right? So there's so many things that I'm exploring within the world of the Lost Dreamer. So much has to do with identity and belonging and tradition, and what happens if you have a lineage but no tradition or training to go with it, which so many of us experience as people who are detribalized through the effects of colonization. We have these long heritages that we don't have access to, and there's a lot of confusion that comes in with that. And I wanted to explore that, but I wanted to do it in a fun way that was playful with different, I don't want to say humans because they're not all human in my book, with different sentient beings, different types of consciousness. And it's kind of like, spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, right? Like sometimes I want to really explore something, but I don't want to get too heavy, too just, this is very serious literature, which I love. I love serious literature, but let's be real. I read fantasy and romance most of the time because the real world is really hard. So I think that playing within a fantasy world, within these kind of fantastical realms, allows us to explore these really kind of heavy, painful subjects in a way that's more palatable. And I like ease. So that's why I write within these worlds. Not that it's easy to write within these worlds, but I think that if you can like dress it up or make it, a little bit more interesting, some of the heavier topics are easier to digest.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's so much, and like you said, easier isn't really the best word to use, but like it creates a more accessible avenue to process complicated emotions. So next up we have Gabe.
Yeah, so I had a lot of fun with this in The Wicked Bargain, especially once I realized what I was doing, because I didn't initially. But I knew from the beginning that I wanted to write a book with a trans protagonist, but I didn't want their transness to be a problem. And at the same time, in my own life, when I first started brainstorming this book, I was closeted and living in a super queer-phobic household. But then I continued working on the book after I moved out, and it allowed me to kind of really explore embracing my queerness in a way that I hadn't been permitted to do before. And so it didn't take me long to realize as I was writing that my protagonist, Marv's magic, was really an allegory for queerness and their journey throughout the novel of coming to terms with and accepting their magic in a world that would persecute them for it was really mirroring my own journey of self acceptance and queer joy. So it was something that I didn't initially realize I was doing, but once I did, I was like, oh, this is fantastic. And I definitely want to like delve more into this. And it was really special.
Well, I love when that like comes out for readers. I had kind of a similar experience with my debut. It's great. Okay, next up we have Aiden.
I think, especially when we're writing for young adults, right? It's kind of inherent, as far as I know, that when you're a teenager, everyone goes through that sense of not belonging and kind of struggling with that feeling, whether or not you can like see that, if it's like an external thing or if it's an internal thing. And so I think that's just kind of like a truth to writing fiction for young adults. Like it's just like ingrained. Like we all have felt that. We've all been there. And I think that it constantly comes up in the stories that I write. Um, because it constantly comes up for like actual teens and young adults. And for the Sunbearer Trials, my main character Teo, he's a demigod, but he is seen as like the lowest form of demigod. He's the demigod class that's like closest to being like related to humans and mortals. So you have like the gold class, and then you have the jade class, which Teo is a part of. And so like inherently he's not allowed to go to the school that the golds get to go to and like learn about how to use their powers and become heroes. He has to go to public school. So he's this, demigod with like literal wings on his back, and he has to be sitting in like a gym class with, those bright green gym shorts or whatever. And like what does that feel like? And like accessibility and classism, that's kind of all going into how this world works. And then to suddenly be thrust into the Sunbearer Trials, which are made for these really elite gold demigods, and being so in over his head. And like, what does it mean to feel left out? But also, what does it mean to be purposely left out and then existing within a society that looks down on you or sees you as other or less than? So yeah, I think that's something that I'm always exploring in my stories, because it's so relatable. Like even as an adult, like I feel like I don't fit in a lot of times.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you're using the plot to kind of, show his identity issues, and yeah, it's great. Next up. So the next question is kind of inspired partially on what Liz was talking about, how we're coming from cultures that have been, completely ransacked and basically decimated over centuries. And we're trying to learn about our cultures and do them justice in our writing. But it's also difficult because of how much knowledge has been lost. And so I'm wondering, how do you take initiative when you're writing Latinx characters and culture in a fantasy setting? Because you're taking the real and the fantastic and you're trying to create something new about it. So that's the next question. And I'd like to ask Linda first.
I think I've mentioned this at other panels, but I think that our existence as like Latinas anywhere in the world is magic enough. Like we have survived so much in order to exist as we are. And yeah, it's hard to like look for information about who we are when we've lost so much. Like, I live in Puerto Rico. I am not from the diaspora, but I still struggle to find information about Puerto Ricans here in Puerto Rico because we have nothing. We've lost everything to Spanish colonization and now US colonization. So it's still a struggle to actually portray correctly, maybe, like culture in any type of setting. But what I like about fantasy is that since I have this belief that we are magic by existence, like we are magic because we have survived so much, I find it just liberating to write in fantasy because it just lets me explore what I think is magical about being able to survive this attack constantly on our culture. So I think that if you're writing from a Latinx perspective, magic just comes. Magic just shows up in whatever you're writing.
You almost made me want to cry. That was so beautiful. We are magic. Okay. Next up, Liz.
I absolutely agree that we are magic. I think, you know, I really struggled when I was developing with the book that became The Lost Dreamer, because I wanted to write within this Mesoamerican fantastical world. And at the same time, I was like, am I being disrespectful? Do I have the right to tell the story? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's also colonization telling me that I am not enough. You know, we have these constant stories that we are not enough. And I was like, you know what? No. And I was thinking a lot about this idea about ancestral trauma, right? That the trauma that our ancestors suffered, and that continues in our lineages, that exists in our bodies. I'm like, well, if that exists in our bodies, so do the gifts, so does the resilience, so does the radical joy. And so when I went into writing, I was like, okay, I'm going to turn into what is within me and use what I named my sacred ancestral imagination, and realize that these stories, you know, live in me, that these stories of resilience and power and change live in me and live in all of us. And that also so many things of the human experience are universal: love, fear, doubt, wanting to belong, issues around family. And just weaving that together, shaped by my experience. I come from a big Mexican and Puerto Rican family, and they're all in the book. They see themselves, and they're like, is that so and so? And I'm like, yes. And I think it comes down to trusting yourself and trusting the stories that are not just inside you, but that live within your lineage.
Oh, that was a beautiful answer. Thank you, Liz. Next up, we have Gabe.
Yeah, so one thing that I think is really cool is there are a lot of fantastical elements and superstition in a variety of Latina cultures and mythology that's already built in. So for me, at least, it's been more about taking inspiration from what's already there. And in the case of The Wicked Bargain, that's both the rich history and the mythology. And then honing in on elements that just really interest me. And from there, the new grows out of the expansion that comes out of the research process and the brainstorming process. And, figuring out what it is that I like most and like what interests me most and what gives me the most ideas and then building out of that.
Thank you, Gabe. Next up, we have Aiden.
I mean, everything everyone else has said is so smart. I feel like anything that I contribute at this point is just kind of words. Um, but I can speak specifically to writing the Sunbearer Trials because I really wanted to include my culture um, in this world that's a secondary world fantasy that's inspired by my Mexican heritage specifically. And I was like, okay, we're going to do this from the ground up, and that meant making a pantheon of gods that were inspired by Mexican culture. And I was like, this is going to be easy, and it turns out it's actually really hard because I looked up like I did a bunch of research about pantheons and how pantheons work, and a really important part of it is that the gods within any specific culture are representative of what that culture values. um, and so I had to take that, and I was like, okay, so if I was writing a pantheon, how would I do this? And it turned into this really fun way of being able to like brag about and like show off Mexican culture, but within this whole new like fantasy system. And so I have a god of bad luck who's called Mala Suerte. I have my goddess of the hearth is called Pen Dulce, because what is more comforting and community and like heartwarming than Pen Dulce? And so that was really freeing and really exciting for me because I got to be like, all right, what is my favorite parts about my culture? And then I get to like show it off. Like I have a god who's mariachi, and like it's and getting to design like what all of these characters wear. And I also like made cities that are inspired by like Mexican states, and that was a really fun one for me too. So it's like bringing, like everyone has already said, our culture is so magical and beautiful to begin with, and it's kind of highlighting that and like exploding it onto the page. And that's something that even with Cemetery Boys, that I would get people asking me questions, be like, "Oh, where did you come up with the inspiration for this magic system?" And I was just like, "I cheated. I just took my cultural beliefs and practices and then gave them like a really like showy and literal output." And I think that that's what's really fun about writing fantasy and about including our Latinx heritage, is that we're so magical to begin with, that we get to like show it off, and it just makes our fantasy world building specifically so much richer.
Thank you, Ada. That was a great answer. I love what you said about like you're taking all the things that you love, and I think that just allows your passion for both your culture and what you're writing to just shine through. And fantasy is fun. That's why we all love reading it. And so I think that's a really great way to do it. Okay. My next question is a really fun question. It's what have been some of your favorite moments along your publishing journey? It can be something about getting your agent or book deal, or maybe an event you've been to or participated in, anything like that. So let's start with Linda.
Okay, I can never choose like one thing, so I'm just gonna say like two things quickly. The first was getting like the email that my story was going to be published. Like, I am a crybaby. I will cry at anything, but I was sobbing. I was ugly crying. I took photos and I sent them to my friends. Like, hey, I'm fine, but you know what? I got an email. Oh my god, I was sobbing. I was taking videos of me crying and sending them to my friends, because for the longest time I thought no one would want to like read my story. So it was such a great moment. And another thing that I really loved is like receiving the messages from readers telling me that they liked the story or that they could see themselves in the story. I received a message like a few weeks ago that said that someday they hope to be brave enough to write a story that also represents them. And I was crying again because I cry. But it was such a beautiful, it almost felt like a circle moment, because um I went through so much time thinking that no one would want to read anything about like an Afro-Latina non-binary teen, and when I was a teen. So being able to share that now is like beautiful. So yeah, that's definitely been my favorite part of publishing.
Thank you for sharing. I remember being so excited when I saw the announcement for you being in Reclaim the Stars. I was just so happy for you, even though I didn't know you or anything. Okay, next up we have Liz.
I think the publishing journey is full of small miracles along the way. I think for me, I came to publishing a little bit later, I think, than most people here. I sold my book when I was 40, and when I turned 40, just a few months after that. And for me, it felt like there were just these signs along the way that this book needed to be in the world. I never queried an agent. My agent queried me. The publisher who ended up buying the book, we didn't submit to. They heard about it. Like, all these little miracles happened along the way. And it was like my ancestors were like, hey, we're not going to let you not do this. And there were all these little miracles that still happen to this day, that I'm like, oh, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. So that's one of my favorite things. And then, of course, connecting with readers who connect with the story is always It's bewildering. It's like, wait, what? I mean, like Linda was saying, like, it's this bewildering feeling because writing is so isolated. You spend so much time alone with your thoughts, wondering if anybody cares, if anybody will connect with your story, if you're making any sense. And then when you have readers have an emotional response to your work, there's no better feeling in the world. But it's very bewildering. You're like, you know, you're talking to, right? Like, because I don't think I know what I'm doing, but I'm glad that you do. But yeah, it's full of little miracles along the way, and I think you have to accept all those little miracles. Excuse me, along the way because it isn't necessarily an easy journey.
That's such great advice, and I think sometimes it's hard to remember to be happy about all the little things when you get overwhelmed with, like, deadlines and, like, lots of stuff like that, and sometimes it's hard to remember, like, I'll have my friends pointing out how cool it is that I'm an author, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I guess it is." Alright, thank you. Next up, we have Gabe.
Yeah, it's funny because a few years ago, I answered this question with like the first time I saw my book in a bookstore, which remains a special moment, of course, was very cool. But watching The Wicked Bargain come to fruition has been so special on like a completely different level for me because I poured so much of myself into the story, and it's the first one that I'm able to publish like as myself with my name on it. So it had a really like deeper personal meaning for me. And on top of that, like many writers, I was a big reader as a kid, and so, like, when I started wanting to, like, get into publishing as, like, a little 13-year-old, I was like, "It'd be awesome if Penguin or Random House published my book, like, that would be the dream," and then they merged, so I was like, "Okay, cool. So that would be the dream," and so when I got the call that Penguin Random House wanted to buy my book, I was, like, on the floor, especially because it was this book, this book that was so personal to me and that was I put so much of myself into it. So that so far has been my favorite moment, but I'm also really looking forward to holding my book for the first time because I know having it like is going to be so special after this long journey that it's been on.
Oh, I can't wait for you to have that moment.
Couple months away.
Yes, so close. Thank you, and next up, we have Aiden.
There's a couple. There's like two. I'm cheating, like Linda did, so it's fine. Um, one of them is just being able to like hear feedback from readers. I have my lot of my social media locked down, so you can't really DM me because I get harassed kind of constantly. But every once in a while, I secretly will read my message requests on Instagram, and I've found a few young readers on there who have like messaged me and being like, this was the first time I ever saw myself represented in a book when they read Cemetery Boys and like how important that story was from them. And there's been a couple of people who have reached out and being like, this book meant so much to me that I named myself after a character. And that's always huge. And like, I just immediately start sobbing. There's 3 people who have divulged that information to me, and it's world changing. It's like I was just writing a book that with all of these like really ridiculous jokes and like these ridiculous characters, and so it's kind of wild to like put something out there that you love so much and to have people relate to it on such like a really deep level that's really magical. So that's amazing. But I think my real favorite publishing moment was the second time I ever went to like a book event, which was Y'all West. I had Y'all Fest was my first one, which was also great. But Y'all West, I was on the West Coast. I was closer to my people. And it was really cool going to my signing line and seeing this huge line of like Latinx kids. And I have never felt so tall in my life because you forget that like young adults are very short. And I would like stand up and I'd be like, oh, I'm a giant. But just like seeing their excitement and feeling that energy in person is like so beautiful and overwhelming and so different from just the theoretical existence of my book on a computer screen because Cemetery Boys came out in 2020, so I wasn't able to see anybody until Y'all Fest, and then like I said, Y'all West was my very second event, and that I think was my favorite, just because there's so many Latinx readers and being able to like see their excitement and connect with them and being like, yes, this is the whole reason I wrote this book, and the universe kept me from you for 2 years. And that's, yeah, I think that's definitely been my favorite. It was so fun, and it was such a great way to like refuel my creativity and be like, yeah, this is why I do it.
I definitely relate to that, especially the 2020 debut, that life. All right. So we've reached the 15-minute mark, and now it's time for our student questions.
How did you get the inspiration to write?
Aw. This is my favorite part. So, Linda, if you'd like to go first.
I think I've mentioned this before, but I get inspiration from a lot of places. It might be like my mother cooked something that I really liked and I wanted to write about it. I wrote a story surrounding a flan de queso because I wanted to write about like creating a flan de queso. So I think I get inspiration from anything that happens in life.
Same, it comes from anywhere. Liz, you like to go?
Again, I think inspiration comes from anything. I have notebooks all over the place. I have notebooks in my car. I have notebooks all over my apartment because I will get inspiration everywhere. I have a little notebook on a shelf, like on the other side of my shower with a pencil, because I'll get ideas in the shower. And I think it's one of those things where you have to write them down, because I think we've all had that experience where like, oh, I'm going to remember that. And then you forget. And of course, that idea is the best idea you've ever had. It was going to win you all the prizes, have you statues all over the world. That one idea, and you didn't write it down, and now you will never be who you're supposed to be. You can tell that I catastrophize a little bit. And then sometimes, I have a notebook next to my bed, and sometimes in the middle of the night, and I'll wake up and I'll write something down. I'm like, I am a genius. And I'll wake up in the morning and it'll be like, cheese straws and melatonin. Like, I don't know what that means, but apparently I'm a genius in the middle of the night. So I think it can come from everywhere. And I think another thing, if you are a writer, if you're a creative of any type, having a body of work with little notes all over the place that you can turn back to when you're a little bit stuck. I will just kind of flip through and see what I have, and I'll be like, oh, I don't know what that means, but it's interesting. Let me play with it.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, especially thinking you're going to remember something and you will not. If you do, you're very lucky. Okay, next up, Gabe.
I do try to console myself that if I forgot the idea, it probably wasn't very good to begin with. And I can't say that's true, but that's how I make myself feel better. So, but to answer the question, I pull inspiration from everything I can. So, like reading, TV, movies, video games, traveling when I can do so safely, research into topics that interest me, literally anything. And I really believe that inspiration is all around us, like others have said. It's just a matter of figuring out what it is that speaks to you the most and then honing in on that.
For sure. It can literally come from anywhere. Like you said, I have a fun little story. One time I was really sick, and I was thinking all sorts of things, and I got a book idea from the patterns of wood on a door. That's the most out there place I've gotten a book idea from.
That's so real though. It's just like, yeah, I'm like, yeah, they're like the popcorn ceilings and you're just staring up
Yeah,
there.
and I was like sick, and I was like, I need to write this down.
Fever dream book.
Aiden, you're at that?
Yeah, kind of what everyone else said, but a big one for me is watching media that I really enjoy, or like reading books that I really like. Yeah, I started writing because I did fan fiction. And I would argue that Lost in the Neverwoods, which is the second book that I had published, is nothing but like fan fiction. I tricked someone into paying me to write. And so for me, it's like character relationships that I really like, or like a trope, or like a really cool setting that will usually spark something. And I'm like, I want to do something like that, but I want to make it different. So I will like watch my favorite TV shows. Anime was a big one for the Sunbearer Trials, My Hero Academia, or like any kind of like shonen anime that had a tournament in it was a huge one. Percy Jackson, obviously, The Hunger Games, obviously. I think sometimes people want to shy away from like their really kind of nerdy fandom stuff. And I just like fully embracing it. I'm like, yeah, oh, yeah, I wrote this because I liked like reading or watching the show. So that's always a big one for me. And even for like the start of a story, but also just like if I'm feeling stuck in a story and I'm like, I have lost my spark, usually I'll go back to the source material that like really got me excited for the story to begin with, and that'll help like recharge and reboost that drive and excitement.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much inspiration from like, every type of media that we consume. Okay, we have one more student question with a video.
My name is Audrey. I'm in first grade. My favorite book is Elephant and Piggy. What is your favorite book?
That was the cutest thing in the
That
world.
was so cute.
Aw, thank you, Audrey. Okay, Linda.
Okay, I'm gonna cheat again, but I'm gonna say like really quickly. This time it's gonna be really quick. My favorite book is Pride and Prejudice, and my second favorite book right now is The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Córdoba. I've loved both books, so yeah, promise, quick.
I love all of Zoraida's writing.
I know.
So good. Okay, thank you. And Liz?
It's such an impossible question because I read so many genres, and I think my favorite book depends on who I am at that moment, right? I think the formative groups, like when I was a little kid, I loved books about people with secrets, which clearly made it into The Lost Dreamer. So when I was growing up, I really loved The Secret Garden. There wasn't a lot of Latina literature for children or young adults when I was growing up, so I was reading a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily written with me in mind. And of course, I fell in love with House on Mango Street as a teenager in the 90s. And I would say that one of my favorite books in the last few years has been, and a book that I just kind of opened like a poetry book because I think it's so well done. It's this book called This Is How You Lose the Time War. And I read it. I can't even tell you how many times I've read it, but it's almost like an oracle to me. I just open it up and I get punched in the face by a line, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I write, for this feeling.
Yeah. Thank you. And then Gabe, what's your favorite book?
So like everyone here, far too many to list, but I'll say the ones that have been my favorite that I've read this year. And so far, that's Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko, A Song of Wraiths and Ruins by Roseanne A. Brown, and This Rebel Heart by Catherine Mock.
All excellent books.
Great taste, Gabe. I was like, yes, yeah.
All right, and Aiden, what's yours?
Okay, so like my all-time favorite book and the book that got me like into reading and being interested in writing was Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Classic, obviously. The Studio Ghibli movie is also amazing. But that was the first like fantasy book I read. Yeah, Lisa gets it. It was the first fantasy book that I ever read. And it was also the first one that I was like, oh, these can be funny also. Because she does such a great job at like, having these high stakes fantasy world, but also having it really funny. And I think that still impacts me as a writer to this day, I would argue. But the book that made me think that, oh, I could publish stories that are about characters like me was Labyrinth Lost by Zoraida Cordova. So I'm glad that we are a Zoraida stan account in here. Yeah, that one like changed my life. It wasn't until I read that I was like, oh, maybe I could do this. Like maybe this is allowed, because up until that point, media had told me that our stories weren't worthy of being told, or no one was interested in buying them. Like they weren't publishable or sellable. So that was a huge game changer one for me.
I love that we're all about to start a Zoraida fan page over here. It's great. Okay, we have one more question from a student. And this one is from Gabriella in 7th grade. What comes to your brain first? The characters, the plot, the side stories, or something else completely? Okay, Linda?
Once I have like a general idea of what I want to write, of what I want to explore, it usually is one phrase that's going to be in like the book. Sometimes it's the first line, like in Whitewater Blue Ocean, it was like when Abuela told me she loved me, we all knew she was lying. That was the first thing that came to mind. But usually it's like one line and then I'll build everything else around that line, kind of like Aiden trying to put a joke. So that's me with one line. Or sometimes it's just like a vibe. I want to like surround everything by this vibe. This is going to be the center of my writing.
Yeah, exactly. The vibe is so important. Okay, Liz?
Oh, I absolutely love that vibe for sure. I think it depends. I think sometimes I'll have a character that just shows up and won't leave me alone. And it's like, you need to write about me. You need to write about me. You need to write about me. For The Lost Dreamer, it was a scene. As I said, I go to the same place every night when I dream. And I always go to this one cove where I float in the water and I look at the sky at night. My crow friend is shouting at me outside the window because I haven't fed her yet. Sorry. If you can hear the crow. I'm friends with all the animals in my neighborhood. So this woman floating in a cove of water staring at the sky was the scene, and that was the seed for The Lost Dreamer. And then sometimes I'll just write toward an emotion, like what do I want the reader to walk away with at the end of the story? What ache do I want to leave with them? And then the puzzle is trying to figure out how to get there.
That's such an important question. Like, what do you want the reader to walk away with from the story? Okay, thank you. And Gabe, you're up next.
Yeah, well, like I said before, I think it depends on the story for me, but premise is often one of the first things I come up with before I come up with anything else. But that can be like super vague, like gay Latina pirates. So like, I don't know what that means. That could be a lot. I could go in a lot of directions with that. So, but once I have like a general idea of what I want to write, oftentimes it'll be like a scene or vibes or a particular mood. So with The Wicked Bargain, before I had really written out much of a plot, I thought like I would just kind of do some exploratory writing, and it ended up being the first scene of the book when I was just imagining this stormy night on a ship with, people very concerned about not being able to find land. And it just kind of like blossomed from there, where I was like, oh, there's all this going on. There's this mood, there's a storminess, and also my character has magic because I can't write a book without magic. Now, can I? And so it all just kind of builds from there. And I think for me, oftentimes it comes to some sort of premise first, and usually the characters and the world will blossom out of that.
I'm the same. I can't write anything without magic. And I usually start with concept first also. Okay, Aiden, you're up next.
Like I mentioned, it's always character, unfortunately, because I like making my life difficult. In Cemetery Boys, it was actually Julian was the first character I came up with, knowing that he was going to be like the love interest, and then I kind of built out the story around there. For the Sunbearer Trials, the first okay, I'm trying not to spoil anything. For the Sunbearer Trials, the character that I first came up with was my plan to be the main character. There's actually going to be two main characters in the Sunbearer Trials, dual POV. And that didn't end up happening. That main character ended up being the maybe love interest in what is now the final form. So it was really funny to like kind of reverse engineer that. But yeah, it's always the character. And then I'm like, I love you. So what can I do to put you through horrible things and then make you come out as a better person on the other side, as we love to torture our characters like that. But yeah, so for me, it's definitely the character for sure.
Thank you, Aiden. So we only have a couple minutes left, so I think it'll be good if we can just quickly share what our social handles are, and then we will wrap up. So I'm Francesca Flores Author on Instagram and TikTok, and F Flores Author on Twitter. And then Linda?
Miss Linda Bennett on Twitter, and then I am Linda.Reads in everything else.
Thank you. And then Liz?
Liz Huerta Writes on TikTok and Instagram, and just Liz Huerta on Twitter.
Thank you. Gabe?
I'm the Gabe Cole on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
Aiden?
I'm Aiden Schmaden on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. I didn't know that you were supposed to have like a handle with like your name in it when I started doing author stuff. So yeah.
It's great. I love that for you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining me on this panel today. It was really fun. And thank you to everyone who attended the Middle Earth of Our Making panel at the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. It was so much fun and I loved it. All right. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Francesca.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.